Hello and welcome to a very special emergency edition of the Football Reporters following the news that Ruben Amorim has been sacked by Manchester United. The club released a statement on Monday morning. It reads, Amorim has departed his role as head coach of Manchester United. Ruben was appointed in November 2024 and led the team to a UEFA Europa League final in Bilbao in May. And it ends with the news that Darren Fletcher will take charge against Burnley on Wednesday. So before I come to you two, Mark and Rob, let's just hear from Ruben Amorim and the words that probably triggered this whole thing after the game at Leeds on Sunday.
Guys, to stop with that, and I noticed that you receive selective information about everything. I came here to be the manager of Manchester United, not to be the coach of Manchester United. And that is clear. I know that my name is not Tuchel, is not Conte, is not Mourinho, but I'm the manager of Manchester United. And it's going to be like this for 18 months or when the board decided to change. So that was my point. I want to finish with that. I'm not going to quit. I will do my job until other guy is coming here to replace me. I just want to say that I'm going to be the manager of this team, not just the coach. And I was really clear on that. And that is going to finish in 18 months. And then everyone is going to move on. That was the deal. That is my job, not to be a coach. If people cannot handle the Gary Nevilles and the criticisms of everything, we need to change the club. No, guys, I just want to say that I came here to be the manager of Manchester United, not to be the coach. And every department, the scouting department, the sport director needs to do their job. I will do mine for 18 months and then we move on.
All right, thank you, guys. Thank you.
But that was it. That was Ruben Amorim's last words, basically, as Manchester United manager after Sunday's 1-1 draw at Leeds. Mark, you were in the room. Did it feel then, as he walked out, that was it?
It did to me. I mean, as soon as he went out, it was kind of, wow, this is another bombshell moment. 72 hours, 48 hours after his last one at Carrington on Friday when he didn't go quite as far as that. But, the press conference was kind of quite tame. It was basically 4 or 5 minutes about the results at Leeds and Benjamin Sesko's performance and Amorim backing Sesko. And then, a question came in about just asking to clarify his comments on Friday. And then he just almost like pulled the pin out of a grenade and off he went. So, yeah, I think the first job, as you know, these things is to interpret what he said and what did he mean. But it was fairly obvious, the fact that the first thing that he said was, the fact that you guys, i.e. the reporters, have had selective information from the club, which kind of suggested or hinted at him believing that the club are briefing against him, some sort of whispering campaign, which suggests a bit of paranoia on Amorim's part. And then, to carry on by saying I'm the manager, not the head coach. Well, he was the head coach. That was his official title. And then at the end of it, I think the end of it was when he finished himself off by saying that everyone else, the sporting director, the scouting department, must do their jobs. So he's basically saying, do your jobs. My bosses do your jobs. And when you start calling out your bosses in public, it never ends well.
Rob, you and I were obviously sat at the Etihad before City Chelsea yesterday, and I remember saying to you, what's changed, what's different, and you said to me, the sort of the mood around Amorim is a little bit different now, and I just wondered if you could sort of elaborate on that and what you feel has changed to obviously lead to this point now where they've gone from saying 3 years we're backing him, he's our man, to this.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to interpret sometimes, but it has felt recently like things have changed a little bit, that usually he has appeared quite aligned with the club bosses and the hierarchy, whether that's Wilcox and Omar Brada. But in the last few weeks, there has been kind of little hints of discontent. A couple of weeks ago before Christmas, I think on Christmas Eve, his press conference, he said he was talking about the January window. And he said that he's come to realise that the time and money that he needs to develop his 3-4-3, that wasn't going to happen, and maybe he has to adapt. And then he was asked again about the January transfer window, and he talked about Wilcox and saying that, I need to have a big say in these kind of things, and no player is going to arrive at Old Trafford unless I give my say so, essentially saying we need to find common ground between me and Jason. It's not going to be Wilcox just picking players and I work with him. And then obviously you've got that press conference again on Friday, where he refuses to elaborate on those comments about developing his 3-4-3. Just he's never ever refused to answer a question in 14 months, and then decided on Friday that he wasn't going to answer this particular question. And he was asked 3 times to clarify these comments. And then pointedly again later on, he's asked about players leaving, and he sort of says in the past he's always wanted to talk about that kind of thing, and then this time he sort of says, well, they just need to talk to Jason, as if to say, that I'm not really in charge of that. They need to go and talk to Wilcox. And then obviously you've got the situation with that happened with Mark. Was watching at Leeds on Sunday. In terms of the club, there has been a little bit of a feeling that what they saw as progress had kind of stalled a little bit. They weren't impressed with what happened at Wolves and that 1-1 draw. They're saying that it's not a case of they wanted him to change from his 3-4-3 and pick a back four. That they're saying that they would never get involved in that, but he was encouraged to be more attacking, to play more on the front foot, to dominate games, and that they thought that he just wasn't doing that. And they thought that the Wolves was a good example, and a game that United should have dominated from start to finish, because Wolves have been so poor, and they just didn't see that he was trying to do that. So there has been a little bit of a change in the wind really around the situation in the last few weeks. Obviously it's come to a head after the game at Leeds. Again, United today, in the phone calls I've had with people at United, are insisting that this isn't to do with a breakdown in relationships, it's to do with a lack of progress on the pitch. You can understand that because the results haven't been good enough, but you can't escape the fact that this has come less than 24 hours after Amorim sat in a room at Leeds and pointed the gun essentially at the club and also Jason Wilcox by telling him he's got to do his job.
I mean, he mentioned in that clip Gary Neville, and he seems to be talking about, I'm guessing, obviously Gary Neville's, he does this podcast basically that he speaks about Man United all the time, and obviously he's quite critical on occasion, and he was quite critical of that Wolves game that you mentioned, which, I mean, look, it was a very, very bad result against one of the worst teams in Premier League history. So I don't think there's too much, that anyone could really say positive about that performance. But Mark, do you get a sense that maybe the outside noise, if you like, has got to Amorim a little bit?
I do, yeah. So he's been a bit disingenuous there by saying that if the club can't deal with the Gary Neville criticism, then they need to change the club. Well, I think he's talking about himself. He's the one that's thin-skinned. I think Sir Jim Ratcliffe is pretty thick-skinned, really. I don't think he cares what people say. And I don't think Omar Barada does either. And I think, Amorim has made a point a lot of the times about, and I think too often he's referenced Gary Neville, Paul Scholes, Roy Keane in press conferences when he doesn't really need to. He doesn't really need to get involved with that sort of thing. He needs to focus on the team and getting the results and getting the players, playing to a system that works. So he did spend a lot of time talking about the pundits or the ex-players. So that suggests to me that it was him that was troubled by it and nobody else. So, but ultimately, the only reason that these pundits and people like ourselves are criticising Man United are finding fault is because there's fault to find. They weren't getting the results. This has been, it's almost like a 14-month experiment by Man United to take a coach out of not one of Europe's top leagues. I won't say it's a B league, but one of Europe's lesser leagues, and put him into the Premier League against proper seasoned coaches with a system that doesn't really work in the Premier League. And a proper coach would maybe, after a month, 6 weeks of trying this system, think, it's not working, I'll change it. But for some reason, Amorim used to say that if I change the system, I'd lose credibility with the players. Well, I don't know. I think if you're a coach that is pragmatic enough to say, guys, it's not working, we'll find something that does work, I think the players would actually be more supportive of you, more respectful of you. So he talked in riddles sometimes, and he got himself into trouble a lot of times by talking. And obviously, the ultimate trouble he's got himself into now is he's lost his job. But yeah, he couldn't handle the pressure of managing Man United and the noise that comes with it. And I think we'll talk about this later, but I think the next guy that comes in, permanent manager, has to be a figure, a personality, a character that can handle what comes with being the Man United manager, because the recent appointments haven't been anywhere close to being able to deal with it.
I thought it was interesting, actually, that the 3 managers he named, I'm not Tuchel, I'm not Conte, I'm not Mourinho. Well, Tuchel fell out with the Chelsea hierarchy over his role when Bluco took over. Conte has fallen out with just about every hierarchy he's ever worked with, particularly obviously at Tottenham. Mourinho, ditto. So I'm not really sure if those 3 are the best kind of examples. But Rob, I suppose it's a difficult question because he's just gone. But how will the Ruben Amorim era be remembered, do you think? Let's look back before we look forward.
Well, I mean, as a disaster, ultimately, because, aside from all the fuss that's gone on in the last sort of 24 hours, the apparent breakdown with his relationship with the club and Jason Wilcox, that the results just haven't been good enough. Now, United fans have been a little bit split about whether they had seen enough to know that he definitely wasn't the right man, or whether with more players and a bit more time, whether the results would have picked up. Now, obviously that doesn't matter anymore because he's gone, but if you're judging just on what has gone before, it hasn't been good enough at all. I think it's 15 Premier League victories in 14 months, which is just nowhere near good enough for a Man United manager. I mean, Ruben Amorim will tell you that there are reasons behind that. He threw away Premier League games at the end of last year because he was trying to win the Europa League. Obviously, he didn't win that. He got beat in Bilbao by Tottenham. He's doesn't feel, or he won't feel like he's had enough of the right players to make his system work. He feels, or he has felt, that they've made progress this season. He was quite encouraged by the game me and you were at, James, right at the start of the season against Arsenal, the game that they ultimately lost, but had played quite well. So he was quite encouraged by that and felt that they were tracking in the right way. But ultimately, he just hasn't won enough games. And Mark there called it an experiment, and it has failed because they tried to bring in a guy who they felt was a proven winner after what he'd done at Sporting. They were quite happy originally that he had this really set identity with how his team wanted to play, because it had been a criticism of Erik ten Hag before him that there was no identity, and what he tried to do at Ajax hadn't really come across to Old Trafford. So they were happy that they hired a guy who had this kind of really set way that the team wanted to play. But ultimately, it's not worked. I mean, United bosses will tell you that they felt there should have been more adaptation and progression in terms of what the team looked like over these last 14 months, and just haven't seen enough of that. When you add in the fact that the results haven't been good enough, and also now that he's pointing the finger at people above him like Jason Wilcox, ultimately it's a recipe for disaster, and there probably is only one decision that could have been made today.
I think we have to go back to the appointment, and I think, we have to criticise Ineos for the way this happened, because remember at the time it was probably about 6-7 months into the Ineos kind of regime as minority owners but controlling the football side of it, and they'd just given Erik ten Hag a new contract 3 or 4 months earlier, probably less than that. So when ten Hag went, you had this situation where you still had Dan Ashworth at the club, you had Omar Barada at the club, you had Jason Wilcox, you had this kind of, it was almost like a battle for influence at the club, and Dan Ashworth obviously left fairly soon after around about the Amorim time, because he was suggesting coaches that had Premier League experience, but the suggestions that were coming from Ashworth were kind of quite uninspiring. Graham Potter, Marco Silva, these weren't the sort of names that would excite the fans or excite Sir Jim Ratcliffe. So Barada drove the decision to hire Ruben Amorim, who at the time was this shiny new coach. He was the next big thing. He was the guy that almost went to Liverpool. He almost went to Barcelona. He almost went to West Ham, but he didn't go to anywhere because I think what I was told with Liverpool was that they couldn't hire a guy that wanted to play 3 at the back and have to change the whole kind of squad to accommodate him. So Liverpool walked away from it. I don't think United went into hiring Amorim with the full knowledge of what this guy was about. I think they thought, this is the new guy, this is the new rising coach in Europe. He'll come to Man United and he'll make us great again. They didn't realise he was so wedded to this 3 at the back. Now, it was obvious it wasn't going to work, but I think there was a lack of due diligence on the United part to realise that this guy just wasn't going to change. And that was a real kind of weakness on his part, because let's be honest, in Portugal, if you're running Sporting, Benfica or Porto, you're probably going to win the league. So he's won the league at Sporting. Fair play, he won it after a long time they hadn't won the league in Portugal, but he did a great job there. But his system was rarely challenged by better teams. It was rarely, if you're beating Benfica and Porto, you're going to beat Boa Vista, you're going to beat Gil Vicente, you're going to beat all these other teams. So it wasn't stress tested. It comes to the Premier League, it's stress tested every week and it fails every week, but he doesn't have a plan B to fall back on. And he's also too arrogant to make the decision to change the system. So that, for me, obviously Amorim wasn't cut out for it, we know that now, but you have to question the appointment process, the hiring process, to why they hired this guy with such a rigid formation, and they can't make that mistake again.
Okay, so before we look at the next sort of potential candidates for the next manager, I want to just dig into that Ineos question a little bit more, and either of you jump in on this. Obviously, they've been there now a while. This appointment has not gone well. They appointed Dan Ashworth. He's left. They've put this infrastructure in. Do you get a sense now from you two cover the club very closely that there is a plan, there is an identity that is independent of the head coach, or do you think they're looking for a head coach to give them that identity?
Oh, I think it's muddled right now, and I think today only goes to prove that. I mean, there was an incident, going back to right when Sir Jim Ratcliffe took over, that he gathered all his executives in a room and said, right, the way that Man United play is going to be decided in this room, and then everyone else fits into it, as in the head coach fits into the system or the way that we want to play that's been decided in this room. And then they went out and hired Ruben Amorim, who has a very set way of playing himself. Ruben Amorim, in his first press conference, said, I decide the way that we play, and I play with my idea, i.e. 3-4-3. Well, that was completely against what Sir Jim Ratcliffe had told his executives in his office when he first came in. I genuinely don't know where they go from here, because you've got a squad that's been kind of tailored a little bit towards Ruben Amorim's system. I don't think that you could hire another 3-4-3 coach, because it just won't go down well with the fans, because it's been one of their bugbears ever since Amorim came in. So you have to go back to a back four or a variation of 4-3-3 and then start building the squad for that manager. There is also an issue about who takes responsibility for what. And, we've talked a lot in the last couple of minutes about Amorim and Jason Wilcox. Well, I was sat in Amorim's very, very first press conference 14 months ago. And when he came in, United said, we're not going to hire a manager. We're not hiring managers anymore. We're hiring head coaches. That's going to be a change for us. He's going to fit into this structure. Amorim sat in front of us in the first press conference and was asked, who decides which players come? And he says, it's got to be me. I'm the guy that's going to have to choose the players because I'm the manager. I'm the one that picks the team. That was completely against what United told us when they hired him. So if you can't get something as simple as that correct, then it's obvious that the rest of it's not going to go particularly well. They have to sort that out first to decide what area of responsibility everyone takes before they hire a manager. And the worst thing that he could do right now is to jump into another appointment that's not particularly well thought through and make the same mistakes again. Obviously, it's going to be Darren Fletcher for at least Burnley on Wednesday. At the moment, United are saying that they don't know how long he's going to be in charge, whether it's just for one game or whether it's until the end of the season. So they're obviously not particularly prepared for what's happened in the last sort of 24 hours. My advice would be to really take your time and think about not which manager you want to get, but what direction as a club you want to go in. What is the plan? Sort the plan out. What plan are you trying to follow first, and then hire a guy to fit into that, not just pluck a manager from nowhere to try and win your game straight away.
It's tricky though, isn't it, Rob? Because you're right. They do need to kind of really consider what they want to do. Do they want to go down the head coach, director of football route, or do they want to be more, look at the top three teams in the Premier League right now are Arsenal, Aston Villa and Man City, and they are all managed by three very controlling managers, right? Yeah. So do they want to go that route and get a manager that has that same personality, or do they want to go the Chelsea route or somewhere in between? Obviously, Chelsea are going a very different route, but it's still a kind of head coach underneath the sporting director. But the problem United have got is, yes, they should take the time, but they do have a chance of qualifying for the Champions League this season. They're only 3 points behind fourth. So they're caught in this situation now whereby can they, Darren Fletcher is Man United through and through, but he's not really got any experience as a coach. So can you trust Darren Fletcher, or can you put him in that position to say, right, Darren, you get us in the Champions League? That's unfair on him. He hasn't got the credentials. But then equally, you don't want to hire a coach now as a knee-jerk reaction that you might want to kind of... look, if they wait till the summer, Thomas Tuchel, Carlo Ancelotti, Mauricio Pochettino are potentially available. So, certainly Tuchel and Pochettino are, because their contract ends. Ancelotti maybe as well. So you've got three world-class coaches there that know the Premier League, that have got success, around the game. Or do you jump now? Do you try and get an Oliver Glasner, for instance, who's got 6 months left in his contract at Palace? Or do you go with a Michael Carrick at the end of the season? It's a problem because it's a two-tier situation now. That the availability of the best coaches now isn't there, but can you afford to wait because you potentially miss out on the chance to get in the Champions League? So it's a tough one for Man United. I don't quite know. And you guys, might have an idea. I don't know if you had to say right now, who's the guy that can take Man United from here to the Champions League that's got experience and credentials and then will walk away in the summer? Tough one.
Well, I'm just looking at the betting, and obviously the markets are having to react, as we all are, to this news this morning. And the current favourite for the Manchester United job is Enzo Maresca. Now, no, me neither. But it just brings me to a point about Maresca to sort of say, obviously, Maresca's been a big story in my sort of world of the last few days, and there are clearly parallels between what's happened with Maresca and what's happened with Amorim. Question to either of you: do you get a sense at all that maybe Amorim has looked at Maresca and thought, "Oh, this is actually the way I get out"?
Well,
That I publicly criticise my owners, I question the role, I sort of push the boundaries, and that's how I move on.
It worked for Nuno at Forest at the start of the season. Remember, he basically went out and criticised Marinakis or questioned, and that was it, bang gone. So I'm pretty sure he's looked at it thinking. Because, I mean, Rob knows better than me because Rob sees Amorim every week, but he's never really been happy there. And there was a story that came out of the Portuguese media about maybe a month or two ago saying that his wife was asking Amorim, why are you putting up with this? Why are you putting up with this? And his response, according to the Portuguese media, was that if Man United, it's worth putting up for. But I thought, if his wife is being quoted in the Portuguese media, that tells me that there's a lot, if his wife's not happy in Manchester, his wife's not happy with the fact that he's getting criticism, it's only a matter of time. He never settled. He never seemed happy with the role. He never seemed happy in Manchester. We know that he kind of offered to quit in January or kind of pondered quitting. It got to the point where he had to be kind of talked around. So I just think he got there, realised the job was too big for him, realised the Premier League was too big for him, but never actually kind of was able to admit it to himself. But I just think he was never quite comfortable there. So this was an obvious way out for him. He's looked at Maresca and thinking, that worked pretty quickly, so let's try it myself.
All right, so Maresca's favourite, I mean, this market is all over the place. Darren Fletcher's quite short. Oliver Glasner's next. Gareth Southgate is in there. I mean, Gareth was obviously linked with a job prior to Ruben Amorim. Do we think there's anything in the potential Gareth Southgate return?
Well, I think we've reported in the past when they were looking for new managers that he was in and around that conversation at one point. I think there was a point at which that kind of cooled a little bit, and I think I mentioned on this pod that I saw at the PFAs in September, Gareth Southgate was up on stage receiving an award and he basically poured cold water on the fact that he could return to management. He was sort of saying at the time that, I've got other things I want to do. It's not necessarily going to be in management. I mean, obviously that may change if it's a job as big as the United one, if that comes up. It's going to be really tough for Ineos and Sir Jim Radcliffe and Omar Brada now and Jason Wilcox to pick, because I just don't see that Mark's right. They're caught in this kind of purgatory now. Like, what do you do between now and the end of the season first, and then moving forward? Because I mean, one of the main contenders for the job when Ruben Amorim got it was Thomas Frank, and since Thomas Frank has then got the Spurs job, and he's already under pressure there, so it just shows you that there is no kind of silver bullet with this. There is no fantastic coach out there that you just come in and you know straight away that it's going to be successful. And this happening to Ruben Amorim now will raise the question again: is the Man United job, has it reached a point where it's become the impossible job, just because of the scrutiny, the pressure, the intense nature of the kind of the eyeballs on the club every single day clearly affected Ruben Amorim? Is there anyone out there who can take this job and get them back to not just back up the table, but you're talking about trying to get Man United back to winning the Premier League and winning the Champions League, and they can't even qualify for the Champions League at the moment. They're nowhere near qualifying for the Champions League. So it tells you about the size of the task that is on offer for anyone who wants to take it. I mean, there will always be contenders, because as Mark has just said, you can't really turn down the Man United job. There will always be people out there who think that they can do it. But I am one, certainly, who is starting to think that maybe this is just too big for anyone. It's become such a massive thing to be manager of Man United and get them back to where they were under Alex Ferguson, that maybe anyone in the world will struggle with this job.
To that point, so you call it the impossible job there. Now, James, we know that Gareth Southgate took on the impossible job about 10 years ago, made it look quite possible. They didn't quite get over the line, but I mean, Southgate's name will come up. He's available, right? And that's a big thing, because if the United want to make an appointment now, Gareth Southgate is available. Two of his biggest backers from 18 months ago are no longer at United. Dave Brailsford and Dan Ashworth, they're gone. So we have to kind of remind people that they were the kinds of people that were driving it. He doesn't really have a relationship with Barada or Jason Wilcox. But, if Man United were to come calling at Gareth Southgate, do you think he'd be tempted out of this retirement or whatever he's doing now? It's Man United. And as Rob said, it's Man United.
I don't think so, because just because all the mood music around Southgate since he left England is that he might not ever manage again. That he's quite open to going into different lines of work entirely, and he seems to have gone down the route of, I think he wants to really embrace the sort of statesmanship side of the England job. And I think he wants to go into helping the next generation and even beyond sport in I'm not saying he's going to go into politics, but kind of, I think it's sort of societal issues and problems about mental health and the sort of messaging to young male adults in particular. That area that sort of football started to take him towards a little bit is something that he really wants to explore. And every time I speak to anyone who's sort of seen Gareth or who's spent any time with him lately, they sort of talk about him in a way that he's moving further and further away from football management. Now, if there's one job that could drag you back, maybe it is the Manchester United job. But as Rob says, it comes with an awful lot of pressure and pitfalls and scrutiny. And really, one of the things that Southgate, I think, was sick of by the end was just the sort of relentlessness of the scrutiny and the sort of media coverage and the fan pressure on him. And that, whenever he went anywhere, everyone's the England manager, aren't they, in a tournament? And I think that whole kind of bubble became something that he just wanted to escape. And you really are, it's a frying pan into the fire job if you're going from England to Manchester United. So I can't really see it. I mean, I guess I'm sort of relating this back to Chelsea because obviously they're on the brink of appointing Liam Rosenior, and I have to say the briefing around Maresca's departure and the sort of talk about how they were going to handle it and what was going to come next. Say what you like about Chelsea, and there's a lot to criticise, and I understand that. But what I would say is that ownership is extremely clear about what they want from their head coach. Might not be right. Might not be the way to win, but they do know what they want. They do want a malleable, younger coach, progressive, can work with young players. They're not really fussed about reputation whatsoever. And that's why Liam Rosenior is almost certainly going to be the next Chelsea manager. Do either of you get any sense that Manchester United actually know what they want? Just broadly speaking, as a profile.
No. Well, no, because if you look at United's history, and this goes beyond Ineos, United's history of hiring managers post Alex Ferguson is to hire someone, sack them, and then hire the exact opposite of that person because it didn't work. And they did exactly the same with Erik ten Hag. A lot of the briefing from United around the sacking of ten Hag and the appointment of Amorim was about how different they were, that the players had become sick and tired of ten Hag becoming too much of a disciplinarian. The players didn't like it. What United wanted was to go out and find a coach, hopefully one that had been a player who knew and could understand what players were thinking, but also one who could come in, speak to players on their level, put his arm around them a little bit and kind of get the best out of them. That was one of the main reasons why they went and hired Ruben Amorim. Now, Ruben Amorim's not worked. They're looking to, they could easily go and go in the opposite direction and hire, they don't want a young manager anymore. They want a proven winner. They want an Ancelotti or a Tuchel or a Pochettino, someone like that. There is no kind of, as far as I can see, there is no set plan about what kind of coach they're looking for. And you're right, James, with the way that Chelsea have done it. I appreciate that lots of Chelsea fans won't be particularly thrilled that it's Liam Rosenior because of his lack of experience, but you can't argue that follows a plan of what they've done in the last couple of appointments. With United, it could be anything. Either you hire another young coach because you're trying to build something for the future to go with a relatively young squad, or you decide that didn't work and you need to hire someone to win now, and then you're looking at someone like Ancelotti or Tuchel in the summer to try and bring you that. It's very difficult to know what United are actually looking for when they come to appoint a new manager.
Rob, let me just ask you one about Darren Fletcher, because obviously he's now the man. He's going to take charge of the team at Burnley on Wednesday. Look, obviously the bookmakers don't really have any clue. You guys have got to make calls. I think Mark's gone to go and take one of those calls now. So we're going to find out more. It's a bit unfair to ask you right now. But, would Darren Fletcher, do you get any sense with him that he has any managerial ambitions? Could this be a situation where disappointment takes a bit of time? He gets a win at Burnley. They then got City. They then got Arsenal. Two games that no one really will be expecting anything from Manchester United. And say he wins one of them, and suddenly there's a bit of momentum. And you know how quickly these things can change. What's your sort of sense of Darren Fletcher and his ambition?
Well, I mean, first off, he's chosen to stay in football after his football career rather than go into punditry. So that's one kind of quite strong pointer that he wants to stay in. I mean, I'm assuming that he would have had lots of offers to work in punditry after his playing career finished, but he didn't. He worked as a coach at Man United. He has been part of Amorim's first team staff at one point when Amorim first came in, and then in the summer went and started managing the under 18s. So he's obviously quite keen to stay in football. I mean, whether he feels like he's equipped to do that job is another matter entirely. I mean, I suppose, again, talking about United's history, there is history of United doing that. They appointed Ole Gunnar Solskjaer after Mourinho on a short-term deal until the end of the season just to kind of steady the ship, and he won so many games, and there was this massive groundswell of support behind him that in the end they couldn't make any other decision apart from give him the job permanently. So there is always a chance that Darren Fletcher comes in, the players respond to him straight away, he wins a few of those games, they start climbing the table because he is Darren Fletcher, and because he's a United Academy boy who went and won stuff with the first team, that there will be fans behind him if he shows any kind of aptitude for the job. I mean, my worry with that is that it doesn't seem to me to be experienced enough to take such a massive job. Even when you talk about someone like Michael Carrick, again, he was quite early on in his managerial career, has been a coach at Man United, a player at Man United, went and took the Middlesbrough job, did relatively well initially, but in the end ended up leaving without getting him in the Premier League. His name will be in the mix for this job, but again, has he got the experience to take not just a Premier League manager's job, but the Premier League manager's job? And that's what Man United is. It's the biggest job in England. I mean, that would be a question mark over him. So at the moment, it's Darren Fletcher's. And if he wins, he's the guy in charge of the job right now. If he keeps winning and keeps winning and keeps winning, anything could happen. I think Man United right now will be looking beyond him and looking at other candidates. It'll be interesting to see what they do in terms of timing, whether they're looking to appoint someone before the end of the season or whether they want to wait until the summer and give themselves more time to make a proper informed choice. These are all decisions now that Sir Jim Radcliffe, Omar Barada, Jason Wilcox have to make, because I imagine, as much as they're saying that this is to do with a lack of progress on the pitch and they've kind of seen it coming for a while, this has been quite a short decision after what's happened at Leeds and happened in the last couple of days. So they need to get their ducks in a row first and then decide which direction they want to go in.
And just finally, Rob, I mean, obviously the January window is open. There'd been a lot of speculation about Kobbie Mainoo in particular and Joshua Zirkzee. I mean, do you think it's a clean slate now for everyone? Could Kobbie Mainoo suddenly have his career revived at Manchester United? Could Zirkzee maybe not be pushing to leave? I mean, are sort of all bets are off now in terms of what happens next in the January window?
Well, I mean, the one thing that Darren Fletcher will be wanting to do straight away is to pick Kobbie Mainoo. I can promise you that, because that is one way of getting the fans on board straight away. two academy graduates, Fletcher and Mainoo. Mainoo's been out in the cold, playing in a different system. Fletcher comes in immediately, plays a back four, plays three in midfield, and he's injured at the moment, but he's meant to be coming back quite soon. And Mainoo gets picked straight away. It's Darren Fletcher will get immense credit for that straight away. There is also questions about whether it opens a door for people like Marcus Rashford to come back. Marcus Rashford's problem wasn't with United, essentially. It was with Ruben Amorim. It was Amorim that froze him out. Rashford, again, another academy boy. He's gone to Barcelona and done quite well. He is, in theory, still on loan at the moment, even though there are plans to make that move permanent. All of these things come into play now. And I would suggest that Mainoo probably, if he was thinking might have to leave in January, probably won't now, because he'll be thinking this is a fresh start for him. I imagine that Rashford's representatives are also making calls to United in the next couple of days to find out what's going on and who might come in and whether there's any chance at all that he could possibly come back to Man United. All these things are going to start happening now, because ultimately, as much as Ruben Amorim has said in the last 24 hours or suggested that he hasn't really been in control of anything, he was in control of quite a lot. He made some massive decisions at Man United in terms of Mainoo and Rashford. And all of those things are clear now. Amorim's gone and there's a route back for all of these players now.
Well, you heard it here first. Amorim out, Marcus Rashford back in. Well, thank you for joining us on this special Football Reporters YouTube show. Check out the pod. It's dropping tomorrow. We'll be talking more United and a bit of Chelsea, and we'll see you again soon.